Officer Thomas Miller drummed his fingers on the steering wheel of his patrol car, his eyes scanning the quiet streets of Pine Ridge Estates. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns and elegant homes that lined both sides of the road. It was a slow day, the kind that made 8-hour shifts feel like 16. He took a sip from his coffee cup, grimacing at the cold, bitter taste. That's when he spotted the silver Audi rolling through the stop sign at the corner of Maple and Oak. Not a complete stop, just the kind of minor violation that gave him something to do on an otherwise uneventful Thursday. Miller flipped on his lights and pulled out, following the Audi as it made its way down the street. The car signaled properly and pulled over right away, which he appreciated. Some people like to pretend they didn't see the flashing lights driving for blocks before acknowledging the inevitable. As he approached the vehicle, Miller noticed the driver was a black woman in her 40s, dressed in what looked like an expensive suit. She had already rolled down her window and was waiting with both hands visible on the steering wheel. Smart move. "License and registration, please," Miller said, bending slightly to peer into the car. The woman nodded. "Of course, officer. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for it now if that's okay." "Go ahead," Miller said, watching her carefully. She handed over her license first. Dr. Amara Wilson. The address listed was in the city, not in Pine Ridge Estates. "Do you know why I pulled you over today, Dr. Wilson?" Miller asked, emphasizing her title with the slightest hint of doubt in his voice. "I'm not certain," she replied evenly. "Was I speeding?" "You rolled through the stop sign back there," Miller said, gesturing behind him. "Complete stops are required by law, not suggestions." "I apologize, officer. I was in a hurry to get to an important meeting. I thought I had stopped completely." Miller glanced at the car's interior, spotless and organized. No empty fast food containers or coffee cups. The back seat held nothing but a leather briefcase and a laptop bag. "You're a long way from home," he observed, looking at the address on her license again. "What brings you to Pine Ridge?" Dr. Wilson smiled politely. "I actually just purchased a home here, on Sycamore Drive. We haven't officially moved in yet, but I had a meeting in the area today." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Houses on Sycamore started at 7 figures. Is that right? You just bought a house here in Pine Ridge?" "Yes, we close next week," she said, her tone remaining pleasant despite the obvious skepticism in his question. Miller studied her face for a moment. "What kind of doctor are you?" "I have a PhD in public policy and administration," she answered. "Though I'm not practicing medicine, if that's what you're asking." Miller nodded slowly. "I'm going to need to run your information. Please stay in the car." Walking back to his patrol car, Miller couldn't help but feel something was off. Pine Ridge Estates was one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the Owe County, and while it wasn't exclusively white, it was pretty close. People like Dr. Wilson didn't typically live here. Maybe she was telling the truth about buying a house, but it seemed unlikely. He ran her license through the system. No outstanding warrants. No previous violations. Her record was clean, but something still nagged at him. He decided a more thorough check was warranted. Miller returned to the Audi. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Dr. Wilson's expression changed, slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her features. "May I ask why, officer?" "Just standard procedure," Miller lied. It wasn't standard at all for a rolling stop. "Please step out of the vehicle." Dr. Wilson complied, stepping out with measured movements. She was tall, taller than Miller had expected, and carried herself with unmistakable confidence. "Am I being detained, Officer Miller?" she asked, glancing at his name tag. "This is just a routine traffic stop," Miller replied. "I need to make sure everything's in order. Do you have anything in the vehicle I should know about? Weapons? Drugs?" Dr. Wilson's expression hardened slightly. "No, officer, I do not, and I'm quite certain asking me to exit my vehicle for a rolling stop is not standard procedure." Miller felt a flash of irritation. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. Would you mind if I searched your vehicle?" "Actually, I would mind," she said calmly. "Unless you have probable cause or a warrant, I don't consent to a search." Miller hadn't expected her to know her rights so well. Most people just went along with whatever an officer asked, especially in situations like this. Look, I'm just trying to make sure everything's above board here. You're in an expensive car in an exclusive neighborhood where you don't live yet. Can't blame me for being cautious. A silver Lexus drove past them, the driver barely tapping his brakes at the same stop sign. Miller had pulled Dr. Wilson over for running. Miller didn't even glance in that direction. Dr. Wilson noticed, however. She took out her phone and appeared to make a note of the time. "What are you doing?" Miller asked sharply. "Just checking the time," she replied. "I mentioned I have an important meeting. I should let them know I'll be delayed." Miller frowned. "Put the phone away while I'm conducting this stop." She complied, but not before saying, "Officer Miller, I understand you're doing your job, but I'd appreciate if we could expedite this process. As I said, I have an important meeting, and I've already acknowledged the stop sign violation. Things will go faster if you cooperate," Miller said. "Now, while I can't search your vehicle without consent, I'm going to ask you to stand over by my patrol car while I conduct a quick exterior inspection." Dr. Wilson didn't move. "Officer Miller, is there something specific you're looking for? Because this seems excessive for a minor traffic violation." "It's surprising to see someone like you in this neighborhood," Miller said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "Someone like me?" Dr. Wilson repeated, her voice perfectly level. "What exactly do you mean by that, officer?" Miller realized his mistake immediately. "I just meant someone new to the area," he backpedaled. "We don't get many new residents here." "See?" she said, though her expression made it clear she didn't believe him. "Well, as I mentioned, we're in the process of moving to the neighborhood." 2 more cars passed by, both slowing but not completely stopping at the intersection. Dr. Wilson noticed this too, her eyes tracking each vehicle. "Stand by my patrol car, please," Miller instructed, growing increasingly uncomfortable with her observations. This time Dr. Wilson complied, walking with dignified steps to stand near the front of his vehicle. Miller circled her car slowly, peering through the windows. Nothing suspicious was visible, but he was committed now. He'd gone too far to just let her go with a warning. Miller returned to his patrol car and began writing up citations, not just for the stop sign but also for a cracked taillight, which wasn't actually cracked, and for obstructed view due to a small air freshener hanging from her rearview mirror. Dr. Wilson watched him write the tickets, her face expressionless. When he handed her the citations, she reviewed them carefully. "Officer Miller, my taillight isn't cracked and a small air freshener hardly constitutes an obstructed view. You can contest the citations in court if you disagree," Miller said dismissively. "The court date is listed at the bottom." "I'll certainly do that," Dr. Wilson replied, folding the papers neatly. "Good luck with that," Miller said with a slight smirk. "Judge Henderson generally trusts an officer's judgment in these matters." Dr. Wilson studied him for a moment, her gaze steady and unnerving. "Thank you for that information, Officer Miller. I'll be sure to remember it." As she returned to her car, Miller called after her. "Welcome to Pine Ridge, Dr. Wilson. Drive safely." Now, she paused before getting in, turning to face him one last time. "Thank you, Officer Miller. I look forward to seeing you again." There was something in her tone that gave Miller pause. Not a threat exactly, but a certainty that made him uneasy. As Dr. Wilson drove away, Miller watched her car disappear around the corner. Only then did he notice she'd left her phone on, the roof of her car recording the entire interaction. Back in her vehicle, Dr. Wilson picked up her actual phone from the cup holder where it had been the entire time. She dialed a number, waiting only a moment before speaking. "Director Reynolds? It's Amara. I'm going to be late for our meeting with the commissioner. Yes, something came up that I think will be very relevant to our discussion about traffic stop procedures. In fact, I believe I've just experienced firsthand what we've been hearing about from community members." Dr. Amara Wilson placed her phone on the passenger seat after ending the call with Director Reynolds. The knot in her stomach tightened as she replayed the interaction with Officer Miller in her mind. 20 years of professional accomplishments, a doctorate degree, and a high-level government position. Yet she was still being judged by the color of her skin rather than the content of her character. She took a deep breath and checked her watch. The meeting with the police commissioner was in 30 minutes, a meeting where they would be discussing the very issues she had just experienced firsthand. The irony wasn't lost on her. The dashboard clock read 2:35 p.m. She had planned to arrive early to review her presentation notes, but now she would be lucky to make it on time. Amara picked up her phone again and dialed her assistant. "Hey Patty, it's me. I'm running late for the commissioner meeting. Can you let them know I'll be there in about 20 minutes? "Of course, Dr. Wilson. Everything okay?" Patty's concerned voice came through the speaker. "I just had an educational experience with local law enforcement," Amara replied, keeping her tone measured despite her simmering frustration. "Actually, I need you to do me a favor. Pull the schedule for traffic court Judge Henderson. I'll need to know when he's presiding over cases in the next few weeks." "Judge Henderson? May I ask why?" "I'll fill you in later. Also, I need you to contact our legal team. Have them prepare a formal request for any body camera or dashboard camera footage from Pine Ridge Police Department. Today's date, approximately 2:15 to 2:30 p.m. Officer Thomas Miller." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Dr. Wilson, did something happen?" "Nothing I didn't expect might happen eventually," Amara said, "but something that needs to be addressed." "I'll take care of it right away," Patty replied, her voice now all business. "Thank you. And Patty, let's keep this between us for now." Amara ended the call and focused on driving. The beautiful homes of Pine Ridge Estates gave way to the city's downtown area as she headed toward the municipal building. Traffic thickened, and she found herself stopped at a red light, staring at the 3 citations lying on the passenger seat. The light turned green, and as she accelerated, Amara caught sight of her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her expression was calm, but her eyes told a different story. They held the weight of a lifetime of similar encounters, some more subtle, some more overt, all equally exhausting. When she arrived at the municipal building, Amara parked in the reserved spot with her name on it. She gathered her materials, smoothed her jacket, and walked into the building with the same confidence she always carried. No one who saw her would guess what had transpired just 30 minutes earlier. The security guard at the front desk, an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, greeted her warmly. "Afternoon, Dr. Wilson. They're waiting for you in the conference room." "Thanks, Harold. Sorry I'm running behind today." "No problem at all. You know how these meetings go. They never start on time anyway." He winked as he handed her the visitor badge she technically didn't need but always wore out of respect for security protocols. As Amara walked through the metal detector and headed toward the elevator, her phone buzzed with a text from Patty. "Judge Henderson presides over traffic court every Tuesday and Thursday morning, 9 a.m. to noon. Legal team is preparing the footage request. We'll have it ready for your signature by end of day." Amara typed a quick, "Thank you," before stepping into the elevator. She pressed the button for the 4th floor and used the brief ride to center herself. By the time the doors opened, Dr. Amara Wilson, Federal Inspector General for Police Accountability, had tucked away the hurt and indignity of the traffic stop and was ready to focus on the bigger picture. The conference room fell silent as she entered. Police Commissioner Richard Garcia stood to greet her. "Dr. Wilson, glad you could make it. We were just getting started." "Sorry for the delay, Commissioner," Amara said, shaking his hand firmly. "I had an unexpected stop on my way here." She took her seat at the table, noting the mix of faces: department heads, community representatives, and a few officers in uniform. This meeting had been scheduled months ago as part of her regional review of police practices and community relations. "Before we begin," Amara said, opening her laptop, "I'd like to make a small adjustment to our agenda today." Commissioner Garcia nodded. "Of course. I'd like to add a discussion about traffic stop protocols in Pine Ridge Estates. I've received some, let's call it first-hand information that I think would be valuable to our conversation." A few people exchanged glances, but Commissioner Garcia simply nodded again. "That's actually perfect timing. Captain Reynolds was just about to present some data on traffic stops across different neighborhoods." Captain Reynolds, a tall woman with short gray hair, stood up and began her presentation. As graphs and statistics appeared on the screen, Amara took notes, occasionally asking pointed questions about racial disparities in the data. So what you're saying, Amara interrupted at one point, is that black drivers in Pine Ridge estates are 3 times more likely to be cited for moving violations than white drivers, despite making up less than 10% of the drivers in the area. Captain Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. That's what the data shows, yes. And has the department implemented any measures to address this disparity? We've conducted some implicit bias training, Commissioner Garcia interjected. But clearly, we have more work to do. Clearly, Amara agreed, thinking of the 3 citations in her purse. I'd like to propose something, a review of body camera footage from random traffic stops in that neighborhood, focusing on interactions between officers and drivers of different backgrounds. The room grew tense. One of the uniformed officers cleared his throat. With all due respect, Dr. Wilson, that seems like it could put our officers under undue scrutiny. Amara turned to face him directly. His name tag read, Daniels. Officer Daniels, scrutiny is part of accountability. If your officers are conducting themselves professionally and without bias, they have nothing to worry about. The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions about training protocols, community engagement initiatives, and data collection methods. Throughout it all, Amara remained focused and professional, even as her mind occasionally drifted back to Officer Miller's dismissive smirk. When the meeting finally concluded, Commissioner Garcia asked Amara to stay behind. You seemed particularly interested in Pine Ridge traffic stops today, he observed once they were alone. Any specific reason? Amara considered her response carefully. She had planned to conduct her investigation quietly, but maybe transparency was the better approach. On my way to this meeting, I was pulled over in Pine Ridge Estates by one of your officers, she said. What should have been a routine stop for a minor traffic violation turned into something else entirely. Garcia's expression grew serious. What do you mean by something else? I mean that I was asked to exit my vehicle, was nearly subjected to a search without probable cause, and was issued 3 citations, 2 of which were completely fabricated. That's a serious accusation, Dr. Wilson. It is, she agreed. And I don't make it lightly. I'll be contesting the citations in court, and I've already requested the body camera footage. Garcia ran a hand through his hair. Can I ask which officer was involved? Officer Thomas Miller. Recognition flashed in Garcia's eyes. I see. You don't seem surprised. Let's just say this isn't the first complaint we've had about Officer Miller's conduct during traffic stops. Garcia sighed. But it's always been difficult to prove any pattern of bias. Well, Amara said, gathering her things, perhaps this time will be different. As she walked to the door, Garcia called after her. Dr. Wilson, if you don't mind me asking, how did Officer Miller react when he realized who you were? Amara turned back, a small smile playing at her lips. That's the interesting part, Commissioner. He doesn't know yet. Back in her car, Amara checked her phone and found an email from the legal team with the drafted request for footage. She approved it immediately, then made one more call. Patty, I need you to do one more thing for me today. Schedule a meeting with my team for tomorrow morning. I want to discuss adjusting our approach to the Pine Ridge review. Consider it done. Anything else? Amara looked at the citations on the passenger seat. Yes. Clear my calendar for next Tuesday morning. I have a court date. As she drove away from the municipal building, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had happened today was unfortunate but not unusual. The difference was that she was in a position to do something about it, not just for herself, but for everyone who had faced similar treatment without her resources or authority. Officer Miller had unknowingly picked the wrong person to profile today, and soon he would learn exactly how big a mistake he had made. The county courthouse buzzed with morning activity as people filed through security. Officer Thomas Miller nodded to the security guards, who waved him through without checking his badge. He'd been here hundreds of times before. Traffic court was as familiar to him as his own living room. Miller glanced at his watch. He had 3 cases today, all routine traffic violations. The first was that woman from last week, the one with the attitude who claimed she was buying a house in Pine Ridge. He smirked, remembering how she'd looked when he handed her those citations. People always thought they could talk their way out of tickets, but he'd been doing this job long enough to know better. He pushed through the double doors of courtroom 3 and scanned the benches. The room was about half full, mostly people hoping to reduce their fines or get their tickets dismissed. Miller spotted a few familiar faces, other officers waiting to testify, and joined them in the row reserved for law enforcement. "Morning, Miller," said Officer Chen, shifting to make room. "Heavy docket today?" "Just 3 cases," Miller replied. "Should be in and out. You?" "5," Chen groaned. "And Judge Henderson is in one of his moods. Already chewed out Rodriguez for not having his paperwork in order." Miller winced sympathetically but wasn't concerned. His paperwork was always immaculate. In 12 years on the force, he'd never lost a traffic case. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the room to order. "All rise for the Honorable Judge, William Henderson." Judge Henderson swept in, his black robe billowing behind him. His reputation for running an efficient, some would say ruthless courtroom was well earned. He had little patience for excuses or delays. "Be seated," the judge said, adjusting his glasses as he settled behind the bench. "Let's begin. First case, City versus Wilson." Miller straightened his tie and gathered his notes. This would be quick. "Officer Miller, are you present?" the judge called. "Yes, Your Honor," Miller replied, standing. "And is Dr. Amara Wilson present?" "Present, Your Honor," came a calm, familiar voice from the back of the courtroom. Miller turned to see Dr. Wilson, walking confidently down the center aisle. She was dressed in a tailored navy suit, her natural hair styled professionally, and carried a sleek leather briefcase. Gone was any trace of the frustration she'd shown during their encounter. Her expression now was one of complete composure. "Please approach, both of you," Judge Henderson instructed. Miller took his usual place at the prosecutor's table, while Dr. Wilson stood at the defense table. She placed her briefcase down and removed several folders, arranging them neatly before her. "Officer Miller, please state the violations," the judge said, not looking up from the file before him. "Yes, Your Honor." On Thursday, September 25th, at approximately 2:15 p.m., I observed the defendant's vehicle roll through a stop sign at the intersection of Maple and Oak in Pine Ridge Estates. Upon inspection, I also noted a cracked taillight and an obstructed view due to items hanging from the rearview mirror. 3 citations for a rolling stop, Judge Henderson remarked, raising an eyebrow. "That seems excessive, Officer Miller." "The law is the law, Your Honor," Miller replied confidently. "And I observed multiple violations." Judge Henderson turned to Dr. Wilson. "How do you plead, Dr. Wilson?" "Not guilty to all charges, Your Honor," she replied calmly. The judge sighed as if already tired of the day's proceedings. "Very well. Officer Miller, please present your case." Miller stepped forward, slipping into his well-rehearsed testimony. He'd done this hundreds of times before. "Your Honor, while on patrol in Pine Ridge Estates, I observed the defendant's vehicle clearly violate the stop sign regulation. The vehicle slowed but did not come to a complete stop as required by law. When I approached the vehicle, the defendant was immediately argumentative. "Objection, Your Honor," Dr. Wilson interrupted. "That characterization is false, as the officer's own body camera footage will show." Miller froze mid-sentence. Body camera footage? He hadn't submitted any footage. With his report, Judge Henderson frowned. "Officer Miller, was your body camera active during this stop?" "Yes, Your Honor, as per department policy," Miller replied, feeling a flicker of unease. "I see," the judge said. "Please continue with just the facts of the stop." Miller cleared his throat. "After observing the initial violation, I conducted a routine traffic stop. During my inspection of the vehicle, I noticed a cracked right taillight and an air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror, creating an obstructed view. I issued citations for all 3 violations." "The defendant was—" Miller paused, choosing his words more carefully, uncooperative with the process. She questioned my authority to conduct standard procedures and made comments suggesting she was above the law due to her, he made air quotes with his fingers, important meeting, and new status as a resident of Pine Ridge. Several people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. Miller didn't notice, focused as he was on making his case. These people often think the rules don't apply to them when they move into nice neighborhoods, he added, immediately regretting the words. Judge Henderson's eyes narrowed. These people, Officer Miller? Miller backpedaled quickly. I simply meant new residents, Your Honor, people unfamiliar with local traffic enforcement. I see, the judge said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe the explanation. Dr. Wilson, would you like to cross-examine the officer before presenting your defense? Yes, Your Honor, I would. Dr. Wilson moved from behind her table, standing directly before Miller. Officer Miller, you stated I rolled through the stop sign at Maple and Oak, is that correct? Yes, that's correct, Miller replied firmly, and during the approximately 15 minutes I was pulled over, did any other vehicles pass through that same intersection? Miller hesitated. I don't recall. You don't recall, Dr. Wilson repeated. Well, perhaps this will refresh your memory. She returned to her table and removed a tablet from her briefcase. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence. This is footage from a dashboard camera, my own, not the officer's, showing the intersection during my traffic stop. You'll note at least 5 vehicles passed through, all making the same rolling stop I was cited for. The judge accepted the tablet, watching the footage with a deepening frown. Additionally, Dr. Wilson continued, I have here the official request for Officer Miller's body camera footage, which I submitted immediately following the incident. The department has provided it, and I'd like to play the relevant sections. Miller felt his collar growing tight as Dr. Wilson set up a small projector. This wasn't how these hearings usually went. People typically just paid their fines or made weak excuses the judge dismissed. The projection showed Miller's approach to her vehicle, their conversation, and his demand that she exit the car. The audio was crystal clear. It's surprising to see someone like you in this neighborhood, Miller's recorded voice said. Someone like me? Dr. Wilson had responded. What exactly do you mean by that, officer? Miller's face burned as he watched himself fumble for an explanation. The footage continued, showing the other cars passing through the intersection without being stopped, and his dismissive comment about Judge Henderson trusting an officer's judgment. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Judge Henderson removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Officer Miller, would you care to explain the discrepancies between your testimony and this evidence? Miller swallowed hard. Your Honor, I was simply doing my job. The defendant did violate traffic laws, as did several other drivers who you chose not to stop, the judge pointed out. And regarding the other citations, Dr. Wilson, would you approach the bench with Officer Miller? They both stepped forward. Dr. Wilson, do you still have your vehicle here today? Yes, Your Honor. It's in the courthouse parking lot. Then I suggest we take a brief recess to examine this alleged cracked taillight and obstructed view. 10 minutes later, they returned to the courtroom. Judge Henderson looked furious. Officer Miller, there is no cracked taillight on Dr. Wilson's vehicle, and the small air freshener could not possibly obstruct anyone's view. Would you care to explain? These false citations? Miller felt sweat beading on his forehead. I must have made a mistake, Your Honor. A mistake, the judge repeated flatly. 3 mistakes, actually, all directed at the same driver. He turned to Dr. Wilson. Would you like to present your defense now, Doctor? Yes, Your Honor. Dr. Wilson returned to the center of the courtroom. I would like to state for the record that I am Dr. Amara Wilson, Federal Inspector General for Police Accountability. I am currently conducting a regional review of traffic stop procedures and potential bias incidents across multiple jurisdictions. The room went completely still. Miller felt the blood drain from his face. At the time Officer Miller pulled me over, I was on my way to a meeting with Police Commissioner Garcia to discuss the preliminary findings of this review, which included concerns about racial profiling in traffic stops in affluent neighborhoods. She turned to face Miller directly. Officer Miller had no way of knowing my identity or position, of course. He saw only what he wanted to see, A black woman in an expensive car in a predominantly white neighborhood. His actions and words speak for themselves. Judge Henderson's face was grim. Indeed they do. He turned to Miller. Officer, do you have anything to add in your defense? Miller's mouth had gone completely dry. No, Your Honor. He managed to whisper. Very well. The judge straightened his papers. All charges against Dr. Wilson are dismissed. Officer Miller, I am forwarding the evidence presented today to Internal Affairs and the Police Commissioner's Office for review. This court finds your conduct deeply troubling and potentially discriminatory. He banged his gavel. Next case. As Miller stumbled back to his seat, feeling like he might be sick, Dr. Wilson calmly packed her materials. She paused beside him on her way out. Officer Miller, she said quietly. This isn't the end of our interaction, it's just the beginning. Officer Thomas Miller sat alone in the police station break room, staring at his untouched coffee. The events in the courtroom kept replaying in his mind. A federal inspector general. Of all the people to pull over and hassle, he had chosen a federal inspector general who specialized in police accountability. The door swung open and Officer Chen walked in, stopping short when he saw Miller. Hey, Chen said, the awkwardness in his voice unmistakable. Rough morning in court? Miller looked up. You heard already? Everyone's heard, Chen replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. News travels fast around here. Miller rubbed his temples. I really messed up, didn't I? Before Chen could answer, Captain Reynolds appeared in the doorway. Her expression was unreadable, but the stiffness in her posture said everything. Miller, my office. Now. The walk to her office felt like a death march. Officers they passed fell silent, some avoiding eye contact while others stared openly. Miller had never felt so exposed in his 12 years on the force. Captain Reynolds closed the door behind them and pointed to a chair. Sit. Miller sat, his uniform suddenly feeling too tight around the collar. I just got off the phone with the commissioner, Reynolds began, her voice controlled but tight with anger. He's furious. Judge Henderson sent over the footage from your body camera and Dr. Wilson's dashboard camera. Care to explain yourself? Miller shifted uncomfortably. Captain, I made a judgment call based on what exactly? Reynolds cut him off. The color of her skin? The fact that she questioned your authority? Or was it just that you didn't think she belonged in Pine Ridge? That's not fair, Miller protested weakly. Not fair? Reynolds repeated, her voice rising, slightly. You know what's not fair, Miller? The fact that I now have a federal inspector general believing my department routinely engages in racial profiling. The fact that your actions have potentially compromised months of work we've done to improve community relations. The fact that 3 other officers are now being investigated because of similar complaints that suddenly have a lot more credibility. Miller stared at his hands. I didn't know who she was. That's exactly the point. Reynolds slammed her palm on the desk. You shouldn't treat anyone the way you treated Dr. Wilson, regardless of who they are. But the fact that you didn't know who she was makes it worse, not better. It shows this wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This is how you operate. She pulled a folder from her desk drawer and flipped it open. In the past year alone, you've issued 157 citations in Pine Ridge Estates. Want to guess the racial breakdown of those citations? Miller said nothing. 83% were issued to non-white drivers in a neighborhood that's over 90% white. Reynolds closed the folder. That's not enforcement, Miller. That's targeting. Those were all legitimate violations, Miller insisted. Were they? Like Dr. Wilson's cracked taillight that magically fixed itself before court? Or her obstructed view from an air freshener the size of a quarter? Reynolds shook her head. In disgust. The commissioner wants your badge. Miller felt his stomach drop. You're firing me? For one traffic stop? No, not for one traffic stop, for a pattern of behavior that's finally caught up with you. Reynolds leaned back in her chair. But you're not fired. Yet. Dr. Wilson has requested that we hold off on any disciplinary action until her investigation is complete. Miller blinked in surprise. She what? Why would she do that? I have no idea, Reynolds replied. But she's meeting with the commissioner right now, and she specifically asked that you join them at 2 p.m. Miller glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 1:30. What am I supposed to say to her? Reynolds stood up, signaling the end of their conversation. The truth would be a good start, for once. The commissioner's office was larger than Miller expected, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Commissioner Garcia sat behind an imposing desk, while Dr. Wilson occupied one of the two chairs facing him. The remaining empty chair was clearly meant for Miller. Officer Miller, the commissioner said as Miller entered. Thank you for joining us. Please have a seat. Miller sat down, careful not to look directly at Dr. Wilson. Dr. Wilson has been sharing some interesting insights from her investigation, the commissioner continued. I think you'll find them particularly relevant. Finally, Miller forced himself to look at Dr. Wilson. Her expression wasn't what he expected, not angry or triumphant, but calm and evaluative, like a doctor assessing a patient. Officer Miller, she began, her voice measured. I've been reviewing traffic stop data from Pine Ridge and several other affluent neighborhoods across this region for the past 6 months. Would you like to know what I found? Miller nodded, stiffly. I've found that what happened between us isn't unique. It's part of a pattern that repeats itself day after day, officer after officer, department after department. She opened her laptop and turned the screen so Miller could see a series of graphs and charts. Black drivers are 3 times more likely to be pulled over in these neighborhoods, 5 times more likely to be asked to exit their vehicles, and 8 times more likely to receive multiple citations for a single stop. Miller felt defensive. With all due respect, Dr. Wilson, correlation doesn't prove— You're right, she interrupted. Correlation doesn't prove causation. That's why I've also been reviewing body camera footage, conducting interviews, and personally experiencing these interactions. She closed her laptop. The evidence is overwhelming. The commissioner cleared his throat. Dr. Wilson has prepared a preliminary report that identifies several areas of concern in our department. Officer Miller, your name appears multiple times. Miller felt sweat beading on his forehead. So what happens now? Am I just a cautionary tale in your report? The racist cop who picked the wrong person to mess with? Dr. Wilson studied him for a moment before responding. That depends on you, Officer Miller. I didn't ask you here to shame you or to end your career. I asked you here because I think you have a choice to make. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. This contains the complete analysis of your traffic stops over the past 3 years, broken down by race, gender, age, and outcome. I'd like you to review it, and then I'd like you to tell me what you see. Miller hesitantly took the folder. And if I see what you want me to see? This isn't about what I want, Dr. Wilson replied firmly. This is about facts. Data doesn't lie, Officer Miller. Your own actions have created this pattern, and only you can decide what it means. The commissioner stood up. I'll give you some privacy. Dr. Wilson, my office is yours for as long as you need it. After he left, Miller opened the folder and began reading. Page after page of statistics, graphs and transcripts from his own body camera told a story he couldn't deny, no matter how much he wanted to. The pattern was clear, consistent, and damning. After nearly 30 minutes of silence, he looked up, to find Dr. Wilson watching him patiently. I never thought of myself as a— He struggled to find the words. As someone who would discriminate. Dr. Wilson finished for him. Most people don't. That's what makes implicit bias so insidious. It operates below the level of conscious awareness. Miller shook his head. These numbers, I can't argue with them, but I never set out to target anyone because of their race. I believe you, Dr. Wilson said, surprising him. But intention and impact are different things. Your actions have had real consequences for real people, regardless of your intentions. So what do you want from me? Miller asked, feeling defeated. I want you to understand that this moment, right now, is an opportunity, not just for you, but for your department and your community. Dr. Wilson leaned forward. My final report will go to the Department of Justice next month. It will include recommendations for structural changes, training protocols, and accountability measures. But it will also tell a story about how departments respond when confronted with evidence of bias. She paused, letting her words sink in. That story can include an officer who recognized his mistakes and became part of the solution, or it can include another statistic about resistance to change. The choice is yours. Miller closed the folder, his mind racing. Everything in his training had taught him to defend the blue line, to stick to his story, to never admit fault. But the evidence before him was undeniable. I never saw myself clearly before, he said quietly. I told myself I was just doing my job, enforcing the law equally. But these numbers, he gestured to the folder. I can't argue with what's right in front of me. That's a start, Dr. Wilson nodded. Acknowledgement is the first step toward change. What's the next step? Miller asked. Dr. Wilson smiled slightly, the first smile he'd seen from her. The commissioner and I have discussed a pilot program for the department. New training protocols, community engagement initiatives, and a mentorship program pairing officers with community leaders. She handed him another, thinner folder. We need officers to help design and implement these changes. Officers who understand both sides of the problem. Officers like you, potentially. Miller stared at the folder, in disbelief. You want me to be part of this after what happened? Sometimes, Officer Miller, the people who have made the most mistakes have the most to teach others. Dr. Wilson stood up. Think about it. We're meeting again tomorrow with Captain Reynolds and several community representatives. Your insight would be valuable, if you're willing to be honest about what you've learned. She gathered her things and walked to the door, then paused. You know, when you pulled me over, you asked what kind of doctor I am. I told you I have a PhD in public policy and administration. What I didn't mention is that my dissertation was on transforming police culture from within. I believe that meaningful change requires both external pressure and internal champions. She looked at him thoughtfully. The question is, Officer Miller, are you willing to become one of those champions? As the door closed behind her, Miller sat alone in the commissioner's office, the two folders on his lap feeling heavier than his police badge ever had. For the first time in his career, he was seeing himself clearly, and he didn't like what he saw, but maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what he needed. 6 months had passed since the courtroom confrontation that had changed Officer Thomas Miller's life. The early morning sun streamed through the windows of the community center as he arranged chairs in a circle, preparing for the day's session. The room smelled of fresh coffee and the pastries someone had brought in, small comforts for what could be difficult conversations. Miller checked his watch. The participants would arrive in about 20 minutes. He still felt nervous before these meetings, though not in the same way he had at the beginning. Now it was the good kind of nervous, the kind that came from caring deeply about getting things right. The door opened and Captain Reynolds walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Miller. Thought you could use this, she said. Big day. Miller accepted the coffee gratefully. Thanks. Not sure my nerves could handle it, though. Reynolds smiled. You'll do fine. You always do. Their relationship had changed dramatically over the past months. Where once there had been merely professional respect, now there was something deeper, a shared commitment to the work they were doing. Dr. Wilson called, Reynolds said, taking a seat. She's running a few minutes late. Her flight from Washington was delayed. No problem, Miller replied, trying to hide his disappointment. He'd been looking forward to sharing today's milestone with her. We can start without her. The community center door opened again and people began to file in, a mix of police officers in uniform, community members of various ages and backgrounds, and a few city officials. They greeted each other warmly, many by name, taking seats in the circle Miller had arranged. This was the 24th meeting of the Pine Ridge Community Police Dialogue Group, a program that had grown out of Dr. Wilson's recommendations and Miller's unexpected partnership with her. What had begun as an awkward, tense gathering of skeptical officers and wary community members had evolved into something none of them had quite anticipated, a genuine forum for understanding and change. At precisely 9 a.m., Miller took his seat in the circle. 6 months ago, he would have rather faced an armed suspect than speak openly about his own biases and mistakes. Now he found himself starting the session with a calm confidence that still sometimes surprised him. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "For those joining us for the first time, I'm Officer Thomas Miller, and I help facilitate these dialogues along with community leaders." He nodded toward Mrs. Hernandez, a longtime Pine Ridge resident who co-led the sessions with him. "Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that this work isn't always comfortable. We're here to talk about difficult things, bias in policing, community mistrust, and how we move forward together. As always, our ground rules are honesty, respect, and a willingness to listen." He paused, looking around the circle. "Today marks 6 months since this program began. For those who don't know how it started," Miller took a deep breath. This part never got easier, but he had learned that vulnerability was not the same as weakness. 6 months ago, I pulled over a black woman in Pine Ridge Estates because she rolled through a stop sign. But the truth is, I gave her extra scrutiny because she didn't look like she belonged in that neighborhood. I issued multiple citations, some of which were completely fabricated. And when she challenged me, I dismissed her. Murmurs rippled through some of the new attendees who hadn't heard this story before. What I didn't know was that the woman I pulled over was Dr. Amara Wilson, Federal Inspector General for Police Accountability. She was in our city conducting a review of traffic stop practices and bias incidents. Miller saw the door at the back of the room open quietly, and Dr. Wilson slipped in, taking a seat against the wall. She gave him a small nod, encouraging him to continue. When the truth came out in court, I was sure my career was over. Instead, Dr. Wilson offered me a choice. I could become part of the problem or part of the solution. She showed me data about my own traffic stops that revealed patterns of bias I had never acknowledged, patterns that affected real people in real ways. Mrs. Hernandez took over, her voice calm but firm. When Officer Miller first came to our community meeting to talk about this, many of us didn't want to hear it. We'd had too many empty promises before. But what made this different was that he didn't come with excuses or prepared statements. He came with data, accountability, and a genuine desire to do better. Miller nodded gratefully to her. Over these past 6 months, we've made real progress. Traffic stops in Pine Ridge are down by 40%, while citations are more proportionally distributed across all demographics. Officer complaints have decreased by 35%. And most importantly, according to our community surveys, trust is slowly being rebuilt. He reached into his folder and pulled out several copies of a document, passing them around the circle. Today, we're sharing the first draft of our new department-wide training program on bias recognition and community engagement. This curriculum was developed with input from both officers and community members. It includes real scenarios, data analysis, and practical strategies for checking bias before it affects decision-making. As the document made its way around the circle, Miller watched people's reactions. Some nodded approvingly, while others frowned at certain sections, making notes in the margins. This was exactly what he had hoped for. Engagement, not blind. Acceptance. "We want your honest feedback," he continued. "This isn't a perfect document, it's a starting point, and it only works if it reflects both police and community perspectives." The meeting shifted into small group discussions, with officers and community members mixed together, reviewing different sections of the training curriculum. The room hummed with conversation, sometimes heated, sometimes punctuated by laughter, but always respectful. Miller made his way to where Dr. Wilson sat observing the proceedings. "Sorry I'm late," she said as he approached. "Congressional hearings ran long yesterday." "No problem. I'm just glad you could make it," Miller replied. "How do things look, from where you sit?" Dr. Wilson surveyed the room, a slight smile on her lips. "Like what real change looks like. Messy, Imperfect, but headed in the right direction. Your report to the DOJ made quite an impact, Miller said. I hear 5 other departments in the region have requested similar programs. 7, actually, she corrected. Your department is becoming something of a model, not because you've solved everything, but because you're willing to try. A young officer approached them, looking nervous. Excuse me, Dr. Wilson. I just wanted to say thank you. The mentorship program you suggested, it's changed how I approach this job. Dr. Wilson shook his hand warmly. Officer Rivera, right? I've heard good things about your community outreach work. Officer Rivera beamed. I'm just following the example others have set. He glanced at Miller before returning to his discussion. Group Dr. Wilson turned back to Miller. You've become quite the inspiration around here. Miller shook his head. Not an inspiration, just someone trying to make up for past mistakes. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Dr. Wilson pointed out. Sometimes the most powerful examples come from people who've had to confront their own flaws. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Hernandez calling the group back together to share insights from their discussions. Miller returned to his seat in the circle, listening as various members reported on changes they wanted to see in the training program. I think the section on traffic stops needs to include more specific scenarios, said one community member. My teenage son still doesn't know what to expect when he's pulled over. And we need clearer guidelines on when to issue multiple citations, added an older officer. There's too much individual discretion there. Miller noted each suggestion carefully. This was the real work, not grand announcements or policy statements, but the patient, persistent effort to change a culture one conversation at a time. As the meeting concluded, people lingered, continuing discussions in small groups. Dr. Wilson approached Miller once more. I'm heading back to Washington tomorrow, she said. But before I go, I wanted to give you this. She handed him an official-looking envelope. Miller opened it to find an invitation to speak at a national conference on police reform, alongside Dr. Wilson herself. Your story needs to be heard beyond Pine Ridge, she explained. Not as some simplistic redemption narrative, but as an honest account of what it takes to recognize bias and work to overcome it. Miller stared at the invitation, momentarily speechless. I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of platform. That's exactly why you're the right person for it, Dr. Wilson replied. This work requires humility. The minute anyone thinks they have all the answers is the minute they stop growing. She glanced at her watch. I have to go. I have a meeting with the commissioner before my flight. She extended her hand. 6 months ago, I never would have imagined saying this, but it's been an honor working with you, Officer Miller. As they shook hands, Miller felt the weight of how far he had come, and how far he still had to go. The honor has been mine, Dr. Wilson. You could have ended my career that day in court. Instead, you gave me a chance to be better. I didn't give you anything, she corrected him. You earned it day by day, choice by choice. After she left, Miller stayed behind to help clean up the community center. As he collected the coffee cups and rearranged the chairs, he thought about the traffic stop that had changed everything, how a moment of prejudice had led to a painful but necessary awakening. Outside the windows of the community center, Pine Ridge Estates was visible on the hillside above town. Miller remembered how he used to patrol those streets looking for people who didn't belong. Now he understood that belonging wasn't about appearance or assumptions. It was about creating communities where everyone was treated with equal dignity and respect. He wasn't naive enough to think that 6 months of dialogue had solved the deep-rooted problems of bias in policing. These issues had existed long before him and would continue long after. But for the first time in his career, Officer Thomas Miller felt like he was truly serving and protecting all people, not just the ones who looked like him.